Kansas came out and they were electric early in the game against Illinois. And Illinois was basically on their heels for, 55 minutes, essentially, of that game. And if that's not the case in this one, if Illinois is able to establish, a better start to the game, and they feel like they can play more to what they want to do throughout the game, that could make for a very interesting game.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Pay heed all who enter. Beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty, and we're going to be diving into all things Illinois this week as Kansas prepares to take on the Illinois Fighting Illini. You got to be careful, Kevin. You can't say Illinois because we'll get Illinois fans. Oh, it's not Illinois, it's Illinois. Whatever. I don't care. Illinois, potato, same thing. Whatever. Team's going to play Illinois this weekend in Champaign. The first road game. It's a pretty big game. It's a game that I think you and I both had circled in the preseason as one we were intrigued about, considering it's Katie's first time going on the road. And we'll see how they play in this game against Illinois. We have a very special guest who's going to be joining us later on the show who covers Illinois to help us break down the Fighting Illini as well. So be sure to stay tuned for that as well. Get full coverage of Illinois so that you can prepare it on game day when you want to do a little bit of armchair quarterbacking when Katie takes on Illinois on Saturday night. By the way, quick note on that. We will be planning to go live on YouTube at our YouTube page at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. So if you're listening on the audio side, be sure to go over there and subscribe. We're planning to go live after the game on Saturday night here, so probably maybe around like 10 p.m. or so. Let's say the game gets started around that time a little bit earlier. We're going to be going live on our YouTube channel with a live reaction. So you'll definitely want to be tuned in for that on our YouTube channel. That's Kansas Jayhawks KCSN over on YouTube. Okay, couple other quick housekeeping notes. First of all, if you want to get involved with the conversation, you'll be able to get involved with our live show on Saturday night. You can also get involved anytime, anywhere, using the KCSN hotline, powered by Mint Mobile, at 913-407-6524. You can always join in on the conversation. Send us a text. I know, because I'm omnipotent. I know that you're listening on your phone right now. I know that your phone is within arm's reach of you, so grab it, send us a text, 913-407-6524. And while you're doing that, if you want a chance to make $500, you can go to BlueWirePods.com/survey, with Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. This survey will help create a better advertising experience for audiences and in turn help us here on the Pay Podcast and on the Kansas City Sports Network. Send to BlueWirePods.com/survey where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for a chance to win $500. Make sure to read the full terms and disclaimers, plus complete the survey for a chance to win at BlueWirePods.com/survey. The link is also in the show notes of this episode. Okay, earlier this week, ahead of this matchup between KU and Illinois, we had a chance to hear from Lance Leipold as well as the coordinators and some players as well. So let's start there with what they were saying kind of about this game heading in for Kansas. Lance Leipold mentioned, the different schemes and what Illinois does. I thought Jeff Grimes said some very interesting things. Not so much about Illinois, but kind of just going back real quickly to the Lindenwood game. One of the things that really stood out to me, Kevin, about what Jeff Grimes said was Kansas had that lull, right, in the late first quarter, early second quarter, where they had a couple of turnovers. And Jeff Grimes was basically like, the sideline was frustrated, and I thought that was a good thing. And if you take that statement, you're thinking, what? How? That doesn't even make sense. And basically, Jeff Grimes, what he was trying to say is like, hey, listen, these guys want to be perfect. They want to go out and they want to perform. And so there was some frustration after the struggles, but they channeled it in the correct way to then go on and be successful with the rest of the game. So that really stood out to me. And that just goes to show, a lot of people may think, hey, it could be all hunky-dory sometimes, but there was some appropriate frustration, according to Jeff Grimes on the sideline for KU. And, of course, they ended up going out and running the ball very well against Lindenwood. One other thing I really wanted to talk about with Jeff Grimes here, Kevin, was the fact that three things. Number one, Jeff Grimes is on the sideline, which for offensive coordinators is a bit more rare nowadays. And number two, Jeff Grimes talked about how he's not even the play caller. He's not even the one signaling the plays into Jalen Daniels. That's actually quarterbacks coach Jim Zabrowski. What was your reaction to that and Jeff Grimes' explanation of why that's the case and sort of him describing how that works.
Yeah, know thyself, right? In terms of, Jeff Grimes is talking about sort of over his years of coaching, how he had come to understand sort of what his strengths were as a coach. And that's being able to look players in the eyes, have not just the relationships with them, but be able to tell like, hey, this guy seems like he could use the ball right now or whatever else. And so that was really interesting too, I thought. And he talked about his background as an offensive line coach. Obviously, offensive line coaches are typically on the field and they're wrangling cats, so to speak. When guys come off the sidelines and they're cussing at each other because somebody just hit their quarterbacks, and that's something that he's able to do down there. I thought it was the other interesting thing is he talked a lot about trust, right? And one of the things that he said that he really trusted was he thought that Jim Zebrowski, he trusted his eye up in the press box to see what he needed to see and also to say the things that he kind of needed to say up there. The other part of it was his trust in Jalen Daniels, right? He said that one of the reasons that he likes Jalen being as creative as he said, allowing him to be that way and not trying to control it was a form of trust. And he said that he hoped that Jalen had that level of trust back with him and Coach Zebrowski. He said, quite frankly, and he's 100% right, if you try to control that too much, you really take away what makes Jalen Daniels a special quarterback. And so having that level of trust there, I thought all of that was really interesting, along with the river quote, right? That was, he said there was an old quote where he says that no man steps in the same river twice because, it's a different man and a different river, and so I thought that was really interesting in terms of how they look at it in terms of guys, needing to change it and adapt and continue to grow it in different situations. But no, I thought Grimes was terrific today, in terms of the different things they talked about. I loved you're talking about the turnovers because I think he used the word, it was something like, what was it? Appropriately frustrated.
Yeah, appropriately frustrated.
And he's right though, right? Because there's a frustration level where you're throwing your helmet and, and getting really mad. But there's also against a team like Lindenwood where you feel like you have a chance to really tear them up, and maybe these turnovers aren't going to have a huge impact on the game. There's a tendency to go to the other way, right? Like, hey, no big deal. We turned it over. We'll be fine type of deal. And so there is sort of that fine line there to be appropriately frustrated where you're not necessarily breaking clipboards, but at the same time, you do realize like, hey, we got to get better at this.
Yeah, the river quote, the discussion was, dare I say, Andy Kotelnicki-esque.
Yes.
For people that listen to Andy Kotelnicki speak when he was at Kansas, sometimes you would ask him a question about football, and Andy Kotelnicki would say, well, Socrates said one time, or, I read a book about airplanes, and then he goes on, whatever. So that was Andy Kotelnicki-esque, I guess. Which speaking of Andy Kotelnicki, he had a decent outing, I guess, in his first game with Penn State with a win over West Virginia in a game that was, I think, a bit surprising for both of us. You and I both felt like West Virginia was going to have a chance to be pretty good this year, and I'm not saying they still can't be, but they were beaten pretty soundly at home by Penn State. There was a weather delay also, but I don't think the weather delay really would have mattered. I think the outcome was going to be the same. And we recorded on Friday, obviously after KU played on Thursday last week. Didn't really get a chance to look around the rest of the Big 12. So let's do that. Let's look around the rest of the Big 12 from this weekend. Was there any teams that surprised you positively and any teams that surprised you negatively? I guess starting with West Virginia, I think you and I are probably both on the same page that we'll feel more negative certainly about the Mountaineers maybe than before.
Yeah, that was a game that I didn't think that West Virginia would win, but I thought West Virginia would maybe hang around a little bit better than it did, especially with that being a home game and the expectations that they have this season. Look, I get Penn State is loaded up with terrific athletes. When you look at Bruce Feldman's freaks list, it seems like Penn State always, dots all over that list. And so I 100% get that there was a talent discrepancy and all those things. I still expected West Virginia to show a little bit better than that one. Texas Tech will be one that I think I'll keep an eye on to see, hey, is this an indication of what's going to happen next? Abilene Christian had a lot of players that had Texas Tech ties. There was a lot of familiarity there. The quarterback who threw for almost 500 yards on Texas Tech was a former Texas Tech quarterback. And so you had motivations, you had the element of surprise, all those different things. I still expected Texas Tech's defense to show up better than it did, Nick. The one thing I will say about it is I do think it takes a lot of mental toughness when you haven't stopped somebody kind of all day. You've just given up a touchdown. Said team decides to go for 2 in overtime and the win, and you're able to bow up and just absolutely slam the door shut on them on that one play. And so maybe that'll get Tech pointed kind of in the right direction. Utah and Oklahoma State looked really good, as I expected them to. The surprise the other way, I would say, was Arizona State, in terms of how good Arizona State looked. Really had no issues whatsoever. It kind of jumped all over them. That was maybe my surprise team where I was like, I didn't think that they were going to be that good. And now Arizona State will be a team kind of worth watching, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, Wyoming, who was the opponent for Arizona State, remember, they had Texas kind of on the ropes late last year.
And beat Texas Tech last year.
Yes. And, Arizona State kind of just mopped the floor with them. I think they'd only given up about 70 yards of offense throughout the whole game before Wyoming went and got a touchdown late in the game to make it look a little better. You mentioned Texas Tech against Abilene Christian winning in overtime. That was a bit surprising. For me, the two most relevant games, I think, from the KU perspective right now would be UNLV and Houston, right? Number one, considering Kansas is going to be playing UNLV. And UNLV kind of dominated. They looked really good, and they took care of business. Matthew Sluka demonstrated that he's a dual threat guy. He had only 71 yards passing, but another 60 yards on the ground. So he's definitely going to be more of a dual threat quarterback that he's going to have to deal with. And that maybe, I don't know. You can look at that result and say, okay, Houston is way worse than we thought, or the rebuild is way further in the other direction than we thought for Willie Fritz, or that UNLV may be a little bit further higher up than we thought, I guess, so to speak. So that was an interesting result, and certainly one I think KU fans should probably take note of. And the other one I think probably was the West Virginia game, because West Virginia is going to be KU's first conference opponent. That was a game that throughout the preseason I kind of had circled as sort of the most maybe important game of the first half of the schedule, I guess the most important pre-K-State game. Let's just put it that way for KU at West Virginia. But if West Virginia suddenly looks like they're going to be maybe flattering a bit early in the year, maybe that works to KU's benefit. To go to Morgantown and try to get a win there. So, I don't know. Those are the two ones that stood out to me. Again, the UNLV one is fascinating because UNLV is a team that people have talked about as being one of the top group of 5 teams in the country potentially, and they go in and handle Houston very easily. But again, is it a situation?
That was the surprising thing to me was the defense, right? Because if UNLV would have won this game by the same margin, but UNLV put up 55 points and won 55-35, I don't think we would be saying a whole lot about it on the show. It's kind of like, okay, UNLV is who we thought they were. Odom's a defensive coach, so you figured the defense would continue to improve a little bit. Like we talked about on our UNLV look back at, and I highly recommend people go back and watch that. They loaded up in the secondary with back-end guys from SEC schools and trying to kind of fix an area that Kansas absolutely just, dominated in that game, in that secondary. And Houston didn't score until the game was over. It was late in the fourth quarter when Houston added its touchdown to only, quote-unquote, lose 27-7. And so it wasn't necessarily even that UNLV won that game or even that it won by 20, Nick. The thing that surprised me was I'm not sure UNLV a year ago would have held any Power 4 team to 7 points, much less, a throwaway touchdown at the end of the game. I'm not sure that they had that kind of defense a year ago.
Speaking of that defense, old friendler Jalen Catalon, formerly of Texas, who had the infamous hit on Jason Bean that was in a fumble that Digno Highshot scored a touchdown off of it last year. He goes to UNLV, and he had 2 interceptions against UCLA.
Yep.
So he's going to be a player to watch for Kansas against UNLV. But obviously,
SEC transfer.
Yeah, well, SEC, quote unquote SEC. Okay. But hey, listen, we may be getting too far ahead of ourselves because Kansas obviously has to take on Illinois in a tough game coming up this Saturday. We are going to be joined by a special guest, Jeremy Werner, who covers the Illini from 247 Sports, coming up here soon. Help totally break down Illinois. But before we bring him on, Kevin, you had a couple things you wanted to mention with Illinois and what kind of you were seeing before we talked to Jeremy. Looking into this game against Illinois, what kind of stands out to you initially about the Illini coming into this one?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is just the emergence of Caden Fagan, right? You know, in terms of he had 1 carry for 5 yards against Kansas last year. He wasn't really a factor. He's a 6'3", 250-pound back, but he can run. And so you can see it. Sometimes he can get the edge, even as a bigger back. They'll throw to him occasionally because he can catch the ball. And so he's a guy that, you know, you heard Cornell Wheeler and different guys talk about it when we talked to the players this week. You got to get a lot of hats around him because it's not easy to take down a 250-pound guy when you're all by yourself, and you really don't want to allow him to build up steam. And so this is going to be a major test, I think, of Kansas's physicality. On the other side of the ball, those who watched last year's game and like really watched it will remember Illinois plays a really strange defense that Kansas doesn't really play against. When you look at the fact they basically have a 5-man front, you know, Kansas plays other teams that have a 3-man front and will walk guys up, but they play 3 defensive tackles essentially, not really defensive ends. And then the 2 outside guys are kind of linebacker, defensive end hybrids. So they're huge. They then have 1 linebacker, and sometimes they'll walk a safety up to give almost like a 5-2 look. Now, when you look at like last year's game, Kansas really troubled Illinois with their speed and making those guys move side to side, attacking from kind of different angles and things like that. Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw almost averaged 10 yards a carry together, Nick. You had 22 carries for 218 yards. You're 2 yards shy of averaging a perfect 10 yards a carry. And so Illinois remembers that game. You know, I'm sure that they had it circled. I'm sure that they're in a situation where they don't want to get attacked in the same ways. But if they come out and defend the way that they've shown it, and the way they defended KU last year was the same way, you know, they defended people when they had the top 10-ish, top 20-ish defense the previous year. So I don't see them changing a whole lot of that, but look for them to maybe try and come up with some answers so that Kansas isn't doing that. The one thing I will say, if Kansas is able to keep Jalen Daniels upright, and we saw this against them a year ago, Jalen Daniels, of course, doesn't go willingly into a sack. You know, he's a guy that can move around and create some things. The further you get out where receivers can kind of make scramble plays and things like that, I think the more and more trouble Illinois is going to have because they don't necessarily have the guys on the back end to keep up with Kansas's receivers downfield.
Yeah, my big thought heading into this game, when you look back to last year, was Kansas got off to such a fast start against Illinois in the game last season. Yep. The booth was really energized, and that really took Illinois out of the style of game that Brett Bielema probably wants them to play.
Sure.
So then they were kind of on the back foot for basically the entire game, playing from behind. And so I wonder if in this game at home for Illinois, if they are able to limit Kansas at the beginning of the game to where they'll be able to play more to what they want to do throughout the entire game, and how that might impact how things shape up. Because I really think, you know, Kansas came out and they were electric early in the game against Illinois, and Illinois was basically on their heels for, 55 minutes essentially of that game. And if that's not the case in this one, if Illinois is able to establish, a better start to the game, and they feel like they can play more to what they want to do throughout the game, that could make for a very interesting game in this one. Because, look, Illinois, we always talk about it. I think the term Big Ten football always gets thrown around as just sort of like a generic, they play Big Ten football. And obviously people know what that means. It's physical. They're going to run the ball, HB dive. They want to try to, punch you and rough you up and everything else like that. Well, obviously, like I said, Kansas last year didn't really allow Illinois to do that because they jumped out to their lead, and Illinois had to sort of play a different style. So that's kind of what I'm looking for in this game is, A, is Kansas able to jump out to a lead again early like they did last year? And B, if not, how does that then set the tone for the rest of the game where Illinois might be able to lean more on Kansas physically than they were able to last year in Lawrence?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I people don't talk enough about game state and how that impacts what the other team is able to do. And when you're down 3 or 4 touchdowns, you wanted to come in and sort of bloody the other team's nose and run the ball. That kind of takes you out of that quite a bit. And even beyond that, think about the game that Austin Booker had last year, where Illinois was kind of forced into throwing the ball, and then Booker was just absolutely dominant. And so I think this is going to be a really good test for Kansas from a physicality standpoint. The other thing that I'm interested to see, and Nick, I believe you're right there with me, Kansas got pass rush against Lindenwood. Where's that pass rush going to be on Saturday against a really mobile quarterback and Luke Altmaier, a guy who hurt Kansas with his legs? And so, players were talking about, DJ Withers, I think, mentioned basically the importance of staying in your rush lanes and all of those things. And so if you're worried about staying in your rush lanes, is the pass rush going to get home? Are you going to be as dynamic with it? I think there are some questions around the pass rush that really won't or can't get answered until you play an opponent like Illinois. And so I'm interested to see how that happens. I thought the defensive tackles were great against Lindenwood. I thought they did exactly what you would want them to do against a team like that. Now, what's next, right? Is DJ Withers legitimately an all Big 12 guy? If he is, this is kind of where you show that. I think we're going to see more from Marvin Grant in this game as a guy that's going to walk up a little bit closer to the box in that Cinco role. I think you're going to see his physicality and run support. And so you're going to see maybe different guys emerge or whatever else over the course of this game, I think.
And we're going to be talking a lot more Illinois coming up on the other side with Illini expert Jeremy Werner, who covers Illinois as part of 247 Sports. He's going to be joining us to help break down Illinois, give us the expert's take on Illinois as he watches them all the time. He'll be joining us here coming up on the other side. We're going to take a break. First of all, I have to tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. You can head over to homefieldapparel.com right now and get 15% off your first order with the promo code PAYHEAT24. That's PAYHEAT24. You can check out the Home Field Apparel exclusive football boxes. Kansas is one of just 55 schools that has one of those available. You can also check out the other items that Kansas has available, and also 130, 140 other schools as well that suits your fancy, including Illinois. So for whatever reason, you're like, I want to be, a super sleuth, go into enemy territory disguised as an Illinois fan. You can do that too at homefieldapparel.com. Also with the promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. More KU Illinois talk coming up on the other side.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
When you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you bump on repeat and you have to share it with your friends so they can experience just how awesome it is? That's kind of what it feels like when you discover Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's such an awesome deal. There's no way you can keep it to yourself. Friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/payheed. That's mintmobile.com/payheed. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/payheed. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This is the Big Eight Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. And as promised, we are joined by a special guest, Jeremy Werner from the IlliniInquirer.com on 247 Sports to help us break down all things Illinois as Kansas will head to Champaign as part of the home and home series for KU going on the road this year to take on Illinois. So, Jeremy, I kind of want to start there, right? This is an unusual situation where KU is going to be taking on Illinois, a team they just faced last season. What to you at this point is the biggest difference between this Illinois team in 2024 versus the Illinois team that traveled to Lawrence in 2023 to play KU?
Yeah, I mean, last year there were some really high expectations for Illinois, kind of going into the year following an 8-win season, kind of a breakthrough for this Illinois program, which, like Kansas, had been one of the worst Power 5 programs for a long time. And last year, that Kansas game was kind of the awakening that, it might not be the same thing. Because Kansas just completely outplayed, outcoached, outspeed, out-athleted Illinois last season. So despite having a lot of players who were part of that 22 team, you could tell the offensive line was different after losing a couple guys to the pros. You could tell they didn't have a running back like Chase Brown. Most importantly, you could tell they did not have the secondary they had the year prior when Evan Witherspoon and Sidney Brown and Quan Martin, all top 66 picks in the NFL draft. Kansas and Andy Kotelnicki and Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal and all those guys just completely exposed Illinois. And to be honest with you, it was a really big wake-up call for, I think, Aaron Henry, the first-year defensive coordinator, going up against one of the best offensive teams in the country. I think they were confident in what they had, and last year just completely jolted them. So Illinois, after a disappointing season, they lost more guys to the pros guys. I mean, Johnny Newton was great in that game against Kansas. Yeah, he really dominated, even though the rest of his team was playing really poorly. And they lost some other defensive linemen up front, lost a couple offensive linemen. But Illinois went really aggressive in the transfer portal. They really addressed their offensive line. I feel like they got 2 future NFL players in J.C. Davis from New Mexico, who's a really great pass protector at left tackle. Melvin Priestley, who's insanely aggressive at right tackle, blocked an Eastern Illinois player off his feet the other day for a touchdown for Josh McCray. So they really feel that they shored up that offensive line. They attacked the defensive line with Dennis Briggs Jr. and a couple more transfers. They attacked the secondary by getting a couple more transfers. And then after losing Isaiah Williams and Casey Washington to the NFL, which those are the first real, Casey Washington was the first NFL draft pick, a wide receiver for Illinois in 12 years. Isaiah Williams was a first-team All-Big Ten guy. But they feel like their wide receiver room could be better depth-wise because they added Zachary Franklin. They have some young guys coming up. But most importantly, guys, I think last year you saw Illinois going through a lot of growing pains. They had a new quarterback in Luke Altmaier, who went through growing pains and also showed that he could be a big-time playmaker. You had offensive linemen on the interior going through their first years as starters, and Josh Kreutz and Josh Geske, and the back seven especially, and nowhere did they get growing pains more than Kansas. But Dylan Rosiak, that was one of his first starts. He turned into a great player for them late last year, one of the leaders in forced fumbles. Miles Scott, Xavier Scott, those guys are going into their second years as starters, Tyler Strain as well. And they get Matthew Bailey back, a defensive back that I think is going to play a big role this year. He missed all of last season mostly with an injury, but he's kind of that 6'2", 215, kind of the Marvin Grant type for Illinois, who's basically that hybrid safety linebacker that makes a huge impact in the run game. And I think that's going to be huge going up against Devin Neal. So they attacked the transfer portal, really got some impact players that I think are some of their best players on their team, but there's also some maturation with, a guy in a defensive coordinator in Aaron Henry, guys returning as their second year. They have way more experience returning than they did last year. And then most importantly, probably the quarterback. He is going into his second year as a starter.
We talked a little bit before this segment about game state, right? And how last year the game got away from Illinois really quickly. And so if Illinois went into that game wanting to establish the run, that option really was kind of taken off the plate pretty quickly. How can things be different for Illinois this year with sort of the emergence of Caden Fagan? And is that the sort of thing where maybe the Fighting Illini could take a little bit more advantage this year?
Yeah, I think if you're Illinois, that's where you do want to take the advantage, right? I mean, you see the Bears helmet behind me, like Austin Booker is a big loss, and I'm really excited after what I saw from him against Illinois last year, and supposedly had a great training camp. So, losing him, Illinois feels like their offensive line is better than last year. And it's weird to say after Isaiah Adams, who played Kansas JUCO, is a third-round draft pick. Julian Pearl was a 3-year starter at left tackle, but they think J.C. Davis is one of the best linemen they've had, and he's got to prove that now. Melvin Priestley brings some physicality, but they also feel like if one of their starters struggles, like last year against Kansas, they have other bodies like Brandon Henderson, who's a sophomore from East St. Louis, who's a really highly touted prospect. Hunter Whitenack got some starts last year. They feel like they have guys they can go to. But most importantly, Reggie Love was a starter for them last year, and he was a solid back, but he really needed to be a number 2. Caden Fagan is what you think of when you think of a Brett Bielema running back in the Wisconsin days, when he had Monty Ball and John Clay. Only Caden's bigger at 6'3", 250, and really explosive. I mean, he runs really fast. He was clocked over 21 miles an hour in the offseason, still getting used to what that means 40 time-wise, but I would say he's probably in the 4.6s for a 6'3", 250 guy. He can make plays in space, but most importantly, he just doesn't lose yards very often. I think he's had 4 or 5 carries in his career so far of negative yardage out of 100 or something like that. He's coming off his best career game, but when he was inserted into the starting lineup midway through last year, he gave them a huge boost in the running game, which was the worst rushing attack Brett Bielema has ever had as a head coach, but just gave them balance in the offense that they didn't have, because they do have a quarterback that can really spin it and really make plays with his feet, and they have wide receivers who are big and physical and can go make plays in the ball, and Zachary Franklin just adds to that. So, but you got to have balance. You got to keep a team on its toes. And I agree with you, Kevin. Like, one of the problems last year is, I was just looking it up, the first 17 plays of the game last year, Illinois had 42 yards. That was 4 drives. And by that time, Kansas was up 21-0. So the offense has to do its part as well, and keeping the defense off the field, and most importantly, keeping Kansas's offense off the field, because boy, I mean, they're going to score points. So they're really good, and they have really good athletes that put so much stress under you. So I do think establishing that run and Illinois proving that it can be back to a Brett Bielema rushing attack, I think that's one of the things I'm most interested in this game.
I wanted to dive a little deeper on Luke Altmaier as well, right? Is a transfer that comes in. He ends up in just his second game for Illinois last season. Now that he's had a whole year under his belt, coming in this year, do you feel like he has more command of the Illini offense? Do you feel like he has the opportunity to make more plays and kind of understands what exactly Brett Bielema and Illinois wants to do offensively?
Yeah, for those that don't know, Luke Altmaier is a 4-star prospect, top 247 guy for us, and the talent has never been a question. His first year, he backed up Matt Corral, who was a 3rd-round draft pick, came into the bowl game against Baylor and actually made some decent throws against one of the best defenses at the time in college football. But then he lost the job to Jackson Dart, and it turns out Jackson Dart is very good. But this is the first year that he has had the same coordinator in back-to-back years in college football. So Barry Lundy Jr. going into his 3rd year, his 2nd year with Luke Altmaier. There certainly is a lot of comfort. Luke had a really rough start. We knew growing pains were going to happen for a first-time starter. He had 7 interceptions in his first 3 games, including 4 against Penn State. His offensive line was awful in that game. Penn State's got some talent, that's for sure. But then he really settled in. He had, after that, in the next 6 starts he made, 65% completion rate, 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Can you tell I've written that a lot? And he also led the Big Ten in scramble yards. So, he really showed that he can be a runner as well. But he did look hesitant at times. And it really became clear that he wasn't that decisive as a quarterback when he got knocked out with concussion. And his backup, John Paddock, came in, guys, and just lit the world on fire. This is a 6th-year senior, last chance, his first chance to ever be a Big Ten quarterback after transferring from Ball State. And he just let it rip and just trusted his receivers to go get the ball. And he got the ball out quicker, and the offensive line got better. And Casey Washington had his best 3 games. But John played so well that Luke had to sit the last 2 games of the season. That's really tough because he really didn't deserve that, right? He didn't play his way to the bench. It's just John Paddock played so well. So this offseason was really interesting, and it was tough for Luke. And he's been great with us, talking about how introspective he's gotten, but he does sound as confident in himself, as self-assured as he's ever been, kind of knows who he is. And he's not a captain on this team. He finished 1 spot outside. He's not the most vocal guy, but he does seem like he's developed some strong relationships. we say all that, and he had a great first game, 213 yards, 9 of 23 throwing, 4 touchdowns. So it's a great start. Like, it was like, okay, maybe some of these things are true. But now he's going up against Kobe Bryant, Mello Dotson, and a Kansas secondary that is probably one of the best secondaries he'll go up against. So it's another proving ground for him that he can take the next step, because while he's not going head-to-head exactly with Jalen Daniels, he does need to score points and lead his team against a really tough challenge. So I think he has taken a step. He sounds different. He's acting a little bit different. Just sounds like a guy who's in his second year and been through some stuff, right? And you come out a little bit stronger. But we'll see the real first test of that coming up on Saturday.
That wide receiver group was really on display against Eastern Illinois. When you look at the game that Pat Bryant had, Zachary Franklin, that you mentioned, had some highlight plays, one of which was called back, unfortunately. But is that the biggest strength of this Illinois team? Like, if you're to go through it and say, hey, this is the one group I feel the best about, what is the biggest strength?
I would probably go with their outside linebacker group.
Okay.
But offensive line would be, their specialists actually are really good. But wide receiver is probably higher on the list than a lot of people would expect, given they lost Isaiah Williams, given they lost Casey Washington, an NFL draft pick, who's, I think, the 4th wide receiver on the Atlanta Falcons. Isaiah made the Detroit Lions, 53, which is really impressive. So they lost those 2 guys, yet it feels like the room could be deeper and maybe more explosive because Casey was more of a possession guy until the end of his career, and Isaiah's a slot target that, catch the ball, make some plays. But the reason he wasn't drafted is because he's kind of a 4.61 guy than a 4.5 guy in the slot. So Pat Bryant is going to take another step. He's been a 2-year starter, been very productive, but he was a little inconsistent. They are raving about him. He's a potential NFL player, 6'3", 215, not the fastest guy, but a great blocker, goes up and gets it, tries to turn the 50-50 ball into a 70-30 ball. That'll be another fun matchup to see him go against 2 potential NFL corners. But Zachary Franklin's a little bit different than a receiver that Illinois has had, because they've kind of had these big physical guys and these small, fast guys, right? Or small, quick guys. He's kind of in between. He's 6'1", 190, so not huge, but not small. And he's not the fastest guy, but he's quick. And he's just so good as a route runner. I call him savvy. He just finds a way to get open, runs NFL routes. And he's a guy that has more career receiving yards than anybody else in the country going into this year. So he's a nice addition. And then 4-star Malik Elzy is a former top prospect that chose Illinois over a lot of great programs. He's 6'2", 220, like 215. Colin Dixon was a former Wisconsin commit that Illinois got. He's 6'1", 210. They have some physicality, and Dixon's got some speed to him. He could play everywhere on the field. So they have a deeper group of wide receivers that they've surrounded Luke Altmaier with some good talent at running back, wide receiver, and the offensive line. The one thing I will mention, tight end is a big weakness for them in the passing game. They have a couple good blockers in Tanner Arkin and Henry Boyer, but those guys are not dynamic receivers. They had brought 4-star transfer Cole Ruskin to kind of be something they haven't had at that position, 6'5", fluid athlete, good, ball skills, but he suffered a knee injury during the offseason, so he's out. So that's a position that pretty one-dimensional at.
Defensively, Illinois got to see all of Kansas playmakers up close and personal, probably too personal for them last season. But Kansas is a new offensive coordinator with Jeff Grimes. From a preparation perspective for Illinois, how much do you think maybe they're looking at last year's film? Are they approaching it any differently, knowing that, hey, there's a lot of the same players, but could be a different scheme that they might be dealing with Jeff Grimes? How do you think they're really approaching defensively to try to stop Kansas this year?
Yeah, I had the question for you guys, because I think the world of Andy Kotelnicki. I think he's one of the best in the country. So for me, if there's one if Kansas has their vulnerability, it's a new coordinator. We know that can not go well, especially when you had such a great guy like Ryan Walters a couple years ago was a Broyles Award candidate, right? And Illinois loses him, and it makes a big impact. But Illinois is preparing. Aaron Henry is preparing like there's a Lance Leipold Kansas offense. And when you have Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal and basically the same skill players as last year, probably going to do some of the similar things with, a couple different things. But their offensive line is obviously a question mark, and I think Illinois has got to take advantage of that. But man, this offense just puts so much stress on you. When you have the threat of Jalen Daniels to run, I'm interested to see how much he actually does run with the injury history he's had. But he just puts so much stress on those outside linebackers to keep contain. But then if they keep contain, oh my gosh, Devin Neal has open running lanes, right? And then that guy, he concerns me as much as the quarterback, just because I think he's a next level impact talent. So they just put so much stress on you. Then Jalen Daniels obviously has a cannon of an arm, accurate arm. So I'm interested to see what kind of differences Illinois makes. Last year they were playing two linebackers out there on the field, and Kansas just exploited that. So I do expect them to get more of the 5-man front, 5 defensive backs with 1 linebacker. And that's why I think Matthew Bailey, their strong safety, boundary safety, is going to be really important for them in run support, but he also can cover a little bit more. So I'm really interested to see what Jeff Grimes shows, if it is a different offense. But Illinois is preparing like the offense they had last year. And, of course, they saw the Lindenwood game, but I think both teams kept things pretty vanilla in their first week.
You never really replace a guy like Johnny Newton, obviously. But what's the defensive line look like so far, and what's kind of the outlook for those guys?
Well, that's the biggest question of the year we have is, can they stop the run? And without defensive line, they not only lost Johnny Newton, but they lost Denzel Daxon, who's a nose tackle, who made the Cowboys practice squad. They lost Keith Randolph, who was not as good last year because he was injured all year. But he was in the Bears training camp, and he's looking for a home in the NFL. But he was a 3-time All-Big Ten player. So they lost everybody on that defensive line. They did go get Dennis Briggs Jr. Out of Florida State, who was a high-impact player on a 13-win team last year. He's a 7th-year guy. He's 24. He's got 2 kids. So he's got grown man strength, 6'4", 280. He's really solid against the run. I think he fills that Keith Randolph role really well. And if he can be what Keith Randolph was 2 years ago, that's a huge boost. T-Rod Edwards at nose tackle has played at Illinois for 2 years, and now he's finally getting his starting spot. He had a really good week 1. I'm interested to see how he follows up because, again, against Kansas' rushing attack, he's going to be so important. But the most interesting thing from week 1 was that Gabe Akis, who played outside linebacker most of his first 2 years, he's 6'3", 275. Half his snaps are on the defensive line. He played the 4-eye, 3 technique. So that allowed Illinois to kind of get their best 11 on the field because Alec Bryant, who's their backup outside linebacker, they always call him a third starter. Well, he actually started an outside linebacker. Gabe Akis started at the 4-eye, and then you had Seth Coleman, who's an all-Big Ten pass rusher. I liked that look because otherwise they were going to count on second-year defensive linemen who, for me, quite aren't strong enough yet. But Gabe Akis on that interior, I thought he got more one-on-one matchups than he got on the edge. And Gabe's more of a power player on the edge than he is a quick burst guy and bend guy. So when he got on the interior, though, he's quick. He's quick for a guy that I found really interesting. And I would imagine against a team that has so much speed like Kansas that they would put Gabe in that position. They want their veterans on the field. So I'm actually more bullish now on the defensive front after seeing Gabe kind of moved around. He did play outside linebacker half his snaps, played on the interior half his snaps, but that gave me a little more confidence because they're not relying on as many unproven guys up front. But I still think the linebackers and defensive backs have to show that they can cover Kansas and tackle Kansas in space.
You mentioned a lot of guys so far, but just for Kansas fans who are going to be sitting down on their couch enjoying the game tomorrow, who are a couple of Illinois players that you think they really need to be paying attention to that could be the difference in this game in terms of impact on for Illinois?
Yeah, for offensively, I think it's Luke Altmaier. The running back, Caden Fagan, you're going to see him be like, is that guy a defensive end? That's how big he is. He's really tough to bring down guys. Even for linebackers, he's bigger than most linebackers. He's bigger than their defensive end. Dean Miller, is that? He's bigger than him, Mike.
I think you're bigger than Dean Miller, to be fair. No, Dean's done a great job of holding weight this year, but he's definitely on the smaller side out there.
Right, but he's bigger than a lot of the guys trying to tackle him in space. So I think he's got all Big Ten potential. I've been on the hype train for him all season. Then Pat Bryant and Zakari Franklin are their 2 big playmakers there. But I mentioned Akis, Coleman. Those are 2 of their best players. Dylan Rosiak, their linebacker, forces fumbles a lot. He's a really smart player, not the biggest, not the fastest, but just that typical linebacker who kind of plays above himself and is really smart and knows how to force the ball out. The secondary is the most interesting thing to me because Terrence Brooks was a huge transfer addition for Illinois. And Kansas fans might know him from starting at Texas most of the last 2 years. He was a 4-star transfer. Illinois legitimately beat out Michigan and USC for him, in part because of their development of Devin Witherspoon, in part because their NIL got better in the offseason. But he didn't start week 1, and he was the 4th cornerback out on the field. So they had Caleb Patterson, Torrey Cox Jr. is an Ohio transfer who came in. Xavier Scott played the nickel. But I still have a feeling like Terrence Brooks, they're going to need his talent on Saturday. So he's one to watch. But Miles Scott, their free safety, had a couple takeaways in the first week. But I do think Matthew Bailey, number 7, 6'2", 215, their boundary safety, plays the role Sidney Brown did. That's so important nowadays when you have that hybrid DB linebacker that fills run gaps and then also covers tight ends, covers wide receivers, covers running backs. He's kind of a real key to what they do defensively.
And then on top of that, looking ahead to this game, what would be your biggest keys to a win for Illinois? And do you have a prediction for how you think this game might go?
Yeah, I was just filling out my preview for this week. And I do think, as Kevin said earlier, offense is to stay on the field. I'm not saying they need to chew clock the entire way, but you got to get first downs. Like, the defense got torn up, but the offense also just didn't stay on the field and just let Jalen Daniels get the ball back quickly. And, the defense just couldn't keep up with that. So they have to establish the run game early and just have a balanced attack, because if they're staying ahead of the sticks, I think this offense is difficult to deal with. So I think Caden Fagan, Aiden Woffrey are two guys that really got to get going. Woffrey, again, that has that speed. And then it's so hard to do, but the defense just has to keep their gap integrity, right? Like against Kansas, that's really hard to do when you got two threats like they have in the backfield, and Jalen can pull it and just throw it downfield whenever, but they really have to be sound. They're going to get you sometimes. That's what good players do, but you just can't miss tackles. You can't be in the wrong gap, because then, Devin Neal especially will really make you pay for it. And this is always kind of a throwaway, but Illinois was terrible at takeaways last year. They were one of the worst in the country. The year prior, they were the best in the country, and that's why they had so much success. So again, to end a few Kansas drives, if they can get a few takeaways with Kansas not scoring points and getting them off the field, I think that would be so significant. To pull off, I know it's not a huge upset, 5 points, but like to pull off a win over a team that people think is better than you, you probably got to win the turnover battle. And I think against an explosive offense like this, getting takeaways not only gets you the ball, but like it takes the ball away from them and ends a drive without scoring points. So those are some of the few things that Illinois certainly needs to do.
Yeah, the betting lines have been fascinating because there's been some discrepancies, right? I mean, you've seen as high as 6, 3, 4, kind of all over the place, which I think to me indicates that maybe this could be a really exciting game, and that not even some of the odds makers necessarily know exactly how this could play out. Yeah.
You asked me for a prediction. I didn't mean to ignore that. In the offseason, like, Illinois always has one upset, and they always have one terrible game. So I think Kansas should be the favorite. I think Kansas more likely wins. But in the offseason, I did pick Illinois to win this game because it's going to be a big crowd, guys. Like, Illinois fans are in on this. Like, it's close to a sellout. They haven't had a sellout, by the way, since 2016. So that tells you Illinois fans do want to believe in this team, but I think they're all kind of putting their chips into this game of tell me why I should believe in this team. But it's supposed to be a beautiful fall-like night for it. But I'm also interested in like the Andy Kotelnicki leaving. Losing linemen is always tough to replace. So I do think there are some vulnerabilities, and I do think the experience Illinois got last year, like, this has probably been marked on their schedule for a while. Not just because they feel like they owe Kansas. It's because they feel like we were better than that. Like we should have never had that. And I think they want to prove to people that they are way better. The biggest number for me though is I think that total is low. It was a 55 and a half. Like, I think this has shootout potential. Like, you're going to have to score in the 30s to win this game. Because I do think Illinois' offense is going to be a lot better, and Kansas' offense obviously has been one of the best in the country the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to see what happens. I know, Kevin, I think you and I both picked Kansas to win this game in the preseason. Kevin, do you still feel the same way at this point heading into this game?
Yeah, but I take to Jeremy's point, though. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think it's going to be well above the over-under. Personally, I think that Kansas probably wins this game like 35-31, somewhere around there. I think it's like you said, I think it's a little bit more of a shootout than last year's game was. It's going to be a lot closer than last year's game was. It's not going to be a 21-point edge for Kansas, I think, a few drives into the game. And I think that's going to change a lot about the way Illinois plays. I think that's going to change quite a bit about the way Kansas is able to play too. And so I like the Jayhawks to get this one. 30 seniors on that roster. I think, they have the experience. They've gone on the road and gotten big wins before. I think they'll get this one, but I do think it's going to be a close game.
Yeah, I
think picking Kansas is the smart way to say it. I really do. The experience they have, like you said, but just I do think this will be a better showing for Illinois. And if it's not, like there will be a lot of questions about this team, about the coaching staff, most likely, and what they're capable of. Because guys, this is a huge game for Illinois based on the schedule too. They have Central Michigan next week for homecoming. So that wraps up the non-conference. At least they should be 2-1. But then they go to Nebraska. Then they go to Penn State, a top 10 team. And then they get a bye week and Purdue at home. But then they have Michigan come to town. And then they have go to Oregon. So if they want to get to the last month of where they have a lot of winnable games with 4 wins and really set themselves up for a bowl, they need to get one of these against Kansas or Nebraska. So this is a really important game for Illinois because the Big Ten schedule is brutal. One thing I'm excited about Kansas, I think they could really do damage in the Big 12. That's difficult to do in the Big Ten. Not that the Big 12 is bad, but the Big Ten has 5 top 10 teams, and Illinois gets 3 of them this year. So just based on the schedule, this is a really pivotal game along with the Nebraska game and just trying to set yourself up to get a bowl bid.
Yeah, I think to kind of echo your guys' sentiments, a lot of Kansas fans will probably think about Illinois and think, oh my gosh, we blew those guys' doors off last year. This is going to be an easy game. We're just going to roll in and get this win. But I think to go on with what you guys said, I expect Illinois to be much better than they were in Lawrence, and I think this will be a much tighter game for KU. But I do lean KU as well. I think, like Kevin said, with the experience they have with a guy like Jalen Daniels, I just feel like they have enough X-factor type players that can make enough plays that could push them over the top. But either way, it should be a very exciting game, and a huge thank you to you, Jeremy, for coming on here and giving us a great breakdown of Illinois. Jeremy Werner from the Illini Inquirer and 247 Sports joining us here on the Payne Podcast. Jeremy, thanks so much. And that'll wrap it up for us here on the Payne Podcast. Just a quick note, we'll be live for postgame after the KU Illinois game on Saturday night on our YouTube page at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Be sure to check that out. And be sure to give us a like, leave us a comment, share your thoughts, give us your predictions, and give us a 5-star rating interview as well. Until then, for Kevin Flaherty, and once again, thank you, Jeremy. I'm Nick Springer. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.